Hello and welcome to the PaTTAN Literacy Symposium and this session, Literacy for All, Literacy Instruction and Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities. My name is Andra Bell and I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Kristin Starosta and Kirsten DeRoche. We are excited to share this session with everyone. Before we start, we have a few housekeeping items to review. You can access the presenter handouts for this session, the presenter bio, and the conference schedule on the PaTTAN website in the link. We'll provide that in the chat. Just as a reminder, this session will be recorded and is 75 minutes in length. It includes a 15-minute question and answer period. To access closed captioning, click on the icon CC Live Transcript on the Zoom control panel on your screen. If you experience any technological difficulties, please go to the technical support guides. It's an area above the schedule on the symposium page. Because this is a webinar, microphones will have been muted and your video feature has been turned off. We would love for you to tweet out or share out on social media all you are learning during this symposium. Hashtag PaTTANLit 2022. And now I would like to pass this to Kristin and Kirsten.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristin Starosta, and thank you, Andra, for the introduction and for participating as a co-presenter. You'll be able to hear from her in a little bit. And Kirsten, thank you too for being a co-presenter. We'll be hearing from Kirsten later on in the session as well. So like I said, my name's Kristin Starosta. I am a PaTTAN consultant in the East office with Kirsten and Andra. And I'm so happy to be able to talk to you all about literacy and students with significant cognitive disabilities. So again, we're from PaTTAN. So, our mission is to provide that technical support and assistance to support the efforts of the Bureau of Special Education. So that this session today definitely aligns with that mission. And we're also committed to the least restrictive environment. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about could apply to students in a variety of instructional settings and classrooms, from special education settings to general education settings. We also are committed to family engagement, and we hope, I'm not sure if there's any family members on this webinar right now. If you are, we welcome you. Many of you probably have dual roles, and we just hope that the information we provide can be used to share and communicate with your families and have those conversations with the families of your students. So today we're going to be, these are the main objectives of our session today. Please feel free to ask questions. We'll probably hold most questions to the end, but in terms of today's session, what we want to talk about is what is literacy for students with significant cognitive disabilities. We want to talk about the research. There are some things the research is able to tell us, and some things the research is still figuring out. So we'll get a little discussion of that. And then, what are some guiding questions or guiding thoughts that you can use when you're thinking about literacy for this group of students? So the next couple of slides, we just want to get some information from you, since this is a webinar type setting and I can't see who's out there. We have a couple of slides to get a sense of who is in the audience. So we're going to be using the annotate feature on your Zoom toolbar. So you should see some version of this on your Zoom toolbar. Look for the little pencil that says annotate, and then this stamp on the next slide. So you can use that to kind of cast your vote. So first, we want to know who's here. So if you can use the annotate function and find the rectangle that best fits your role, and if you can put your stamp there. So if I'm a special ed teacher, I would put it in the purple rectangle. Anyone we forgot, I'm sorry if you're not on there, you can put it yourself in that lower right-hand corner. So I'll just pause for a minute and give you time to get to the annotation and pick your stamp and put it on the screen. Hopefully this works.
Okay, I just want to let everybody know that annotate is at the top of your screen under view options. And if you're on a phone or an iPad, you probably don't have that option.
We'll give it a try.
Okay, everybody's saying it's not there.
It's not there. Okay.
Hmm.
We don't, I mean, I have disable annotation for others, but that's not like clicked. So
Yeah, I don't see that either. Okay, so
okay, well, we'll just move along. If you can put in the chat, you know, what your role is, we'll get a sense of who's here. Because we were kind of speculating ourselves who might be in attendance, but we want to hear from you. So you can use the chat to put what your role is.
I see a lot of SLPs, special education teachers, reading specialists, gen ed, consultants.
Great.
grad student, coaches, admin, school psych.
Great. Great. Thank you, guys. And thank you for going with the flow. That happens. So let's see. The next slide, again, this was intended for annotation, but we'll just use the chat. Let us know if you have a student with significant cognitive disabilities in your classroom or your building or on your caseload. So we'll call that a 1. How about we do that? We'll call that a 1. We'll call a 2 if you had some experience, in the past, and a 3 if you've had no experience. I see lots of 1s and a couple of 2s. Okay, great. So I would say our average is probably like a 1.75 or no, lower, maybe like a 1.3. Great. Great. Thank you, everybody. Great. All right. So the last slide doesn't require any annotation. You can put in the chat here too. But when Andrea, Kirsten, and I were talking about literacy, you know, literacy is super important, and not just for nerdy people like us who are teachers and into literacy instruction, but it's important to our everyday lives. So what we created was kind of like a reading bingo board here of all the things that you might do in a typical day that involve reading in some way. So take a look at this reading bingo board and kind of count up for yourself how many of these squares you've done already today. So, you know, if you've read an email, that counts as 1 point. If you read a newspaper, that counts as 1 point. This one is very specific to me, but it's something I do on a regular basis. Read the Bluey episode list on Disney Plus to my niece so that they can pick out an episode to watch. That may be, hopefully somebody else shares that. If it's not Bluey, maybe some other episode list. But just look at this, count up how many, and you can put your total number in the chat. Oh, 20, 17, 7, 15, 6, 22. How many are there? I didn't even count that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4. So 20. So 24 would be the high score. So we have we have a lot in the upper numbers. Okay.
They get a free space too, so it'd be
Oh,
25,
yes.
right?
Yeah, right. Sure, 25.
The bonus.
For today, but it's still early. Thank you. Definitely. So yeah, so as great, thank you. Oh, we do have a 24. We do have a 24. There we go. So as you're looking through this, you can see that I don't need to tell you that reading is a pretty essential skill to our everyday life. And, you know, the more you read, the more things you'll know, the more you'll learn, the more places you go. Once you learn to read, you will be forever free. Reading is the gateway for children that makes all other learning possible. So when we're talking about reading, when we're talking about literacy, literacy is a life skill. It's one of the most functional skills out there that we can have. You can see by your numbers how often you use that reading skill even today at 2 o'clock and the day's not even over yet. So if we're talking about literacy being such a functional life skill, then if we're talking about literacy for all, then does that always include this group of students that we're talking about today? So students with intellectual disabilities, students on the autism spectrum, students with multiple disabilities, students with communication needs. When we talk about literacy for all, does the all always include this group of students? Now, a couple things about this group of students. We may have the term significant cognitive disabilities. That term means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Some of these disability names are, can fit underneath there. But we also know that this is not a homogeneous group of students. It's a group of great diversity. And so kind of what applies to one student in that group may not always apply to another student in that group. So while we are talking about it as a group, we do recognize the variety and variability of the group. We also know that students in this group receive a variety of different types of literacy instruction. Some of the students you serve may be receiving the type of instruction that we're going to be talking about today. Some may have a different focus. Some may be using a variety of methods or different methods from what we're talking about today. We recognize that, decisions about literacy instruction are an IEP team decision and are a decision of the school and the family. But what we're just trying to do is provide an overview and one perspective on what literacy instruction could look like for students within this group. So we wanted to start off by sharing this model of the emphasis of a literacy program of different age levels. And this is from Diane Browder, who is a researcher who is quite commonly shows up in this area of research, and from Diane Browder and her colleagues. And this model provides a structure for making decisions about what should be the emphasis of literacy instruction at different times in a student's school life. So you have two sections or two types of kind of reading instruction: how to read, so decoding, and then functional reading. We also have this two-sided arrow that talks about more emphasis and less emphasis. And then we have the age ranges of elementary, middle, and secondary. And just so you know, this title here is a hyperlink to the article. The article is also hyperlinked at the end of the presentation with the citation, so you can get to the article. In the middle square, we have literature, so narrative literature and informational literature, including the use of books at all ages. So as you can see here, it shows that in this model, it's proposing that how to read is, so focusing on decoding phonics, that sort of thing, is always present, but the emphasis, you know what? I think this should be switched around. Oh my goodness, I think I made a terrible mistake there. These should be switched around. So it should say more emphasis down here and less emphasis up here. So how to read should be an emphasis in the elementary ages and kind of decrease in emphasis to the secondary ages. And then functional reading should be more of an emphasis in the secondary grades and less of an emphasis in the elementary grades. And then literature should be an emphasis across all grades. So providing books and access and instruction related to narrative and informational literature. When we're talking about this model too, we kind of look at it in two different directions. So increased access to literature and increased independence as a reader. So if we want to focus instruction on increased independence as a reader, we're thinking about what does our reading instruction need to look like? And it looks like the 5 areas of reading that is very familiar to the science of reading philosophy. So a focus on phonemic awareness, phonics, comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency. And also, we know with with this group of students, instruction focused on generalization is super important. So we want to give lots of opportunities to apply and generalize reading skills to different texts with functional activities and with writing. The other area of instruction should focus on increased access to literature. So opportunities to access literature through time for literacy, adapted books, having either the individual themselves or having readers read to them, teachers, peers, families, and use of technology to access text. We want to also focus on instruction to access literature. So how to teach reading aloud, how to teach text awareness, vocabulary, and listening comprehension. And within this area too, is the idea of access to language. So literature can be that text, but also if someone's reading it aloud to them, or they're reading an audio book, how do they access that information as well? So these two models provide some guidance about how we should think about what literacy instruction looks like, what areas we should focus on, and with that other model on the previous slide, kind of how that focus may change over time. So if becoming an independent reader is a life skill and should be the focus of instruction, what does the research say about what works in terms of that area of literacy instruction? So we found a meta-analysis from 2019 that looked at studies that focused on literacy instruction. When this meta-analysis looked at prior lit reviews between 1975 and 2013, they found that during that time frame, so a huge time frame, but during that time frame, earlier studies focused on vocabulary and sight word instruction. Toward the later years, there was more of a focus on phonics instruction. So I think that I thought that was an interesting point to point out, because it kind of replicates, I think, where we're moving in schools. When I was first started out in special education in the 1990s, the focus was more on that sight word instruction for this group of students. But over time, we've increased our technology and our abilities and our research, and have focused more on how can we teach phonics-based instruction to students with more significant disabilities. So this 2019 meta-analysis looked at 13 articles across 14 studies. There were, across all those articles and studies, there were almost 300 participants, so pretty big pool of students. Those students had a variety of disabilities, including intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, Down syndrome, speech impairments, autism spectrum. And even though we're hesitant about the use of IQ ranges, the IQ ranges were reported, but there were no adaptive scores given. So most of the studies focused on that elementary middle school age range, though a few studies did have some older participants included. In terms of overall the studies, the reading interventions that were taught did represent that shift towards more phonics instruction in research. So it focused on phonics, phonemic awareness, and some on comprehension instruction. Some of the instructional programs that were reported in those studies were Road to Reading, Road to the Code, Early Interventions in Reading, and then there were also researcher-created materials. Some adaptations and instructional approaches that were used were definitely, those systematic instruction, direct instruction techniques like systems of prompts, systematic corrective procedures, the use of modeling, but they also included use of AAC devices for those students who required that. And then probably more typical adaptations like word boxes and word sort activities. There was a big variety of the intensity of the interventions and the length. Many were daily sessions between 15 and 50 minutes, and those took place between 2 weeks. And there were a couple of studies that went across years, so a wide variety in the research studies included. Now, this may be overwhelming to some. It's totally okay if it is. The bottom line is that phonics instruction worked. So so that's the short version of the story. The longer version of the story is that each one of these studies here listed on the left hand of the table, these are all the studies that were included in the meta-analysis. What the squares are, those are the measured effect sizes for each of the studies. So you can see the effect sizes are all on the positive end of the scale. So that all means that there was an increase in skills. The bigger the square meant that the weight of the effect size was greater. So kind of the significance of it was greater. The overall summary effect size was between like 1 and 2, represented by this elongated diamond shape down here. So it just gives you a visual that there was variety across studies, but overall positive effect sizes of a pretty significant degree. So in terms of what instructional strategies should be used for this group of students, we're going to be talking about it in terms of what we want to focus on in terms of word recognition strategies and then also comprehension strategies. So Kristin is going to talk some first about word recognition strategies overall, and then I'm going to provide some examples from the research.
So just kind of going through some of these examples that are on the slide here, we have thinking about manipulative use or making it as multisensory as possible, and thinking about manipulatives that potentially are even used at the word level. So thinking about phonological awareness and what words make up any sentence. Maybe you have a manipulative like a felt that you might be moving for each word in a sentence to illustrate the difference between individual words. We want to make sure that we're providing choices for responses that are appropriate for the student and individualized for that student so that they have the ability to access and respond in the way that we want them to with the content or the either a phoneme or a grapheme or even an individual letter if that's available for them. They need to have access to all levels of that phonological awareness so that we're sure that that they've learned that. Using Elkonin boxes or sound boxes and teaching students to phoneme grapheme map. So you want one box, one sound box per letter or letter combinations that match up to that sound. We need to teach our students that each box represents one sound, and these are the letters that belong to that sound in this word. So we need to make sure that any AAC devices or manipulatives that we use provide students access to letters and graphemes. We need to make, if students are at this level and available for this, we would need to make sure that they're aware of prefixes and suffixes. For example, S, ES for plurals, ING on the ends. If there are any identifiable roots or bases within words, are we making sure that we're addressing that within our instruction? We have a note here that even to think about magnetic manipulatives and how those may be easier for certain students depending on any physical needs that they may have, being able to manipulate the magnets rather than holding a pencil as we would typically think of. We refer to that as alternate pencils, and making sure that whatever AAC options that you have determined for any specific student are available to teach what it is that we're teaching and give them a way to communicate their learning with their AAC.
So we have a couple examples to show of what this might look like. It's not the example. Like, it's not like this is the way you do this for every single student out there with intellectual disabilities, because it is not, you know, a homogeneous group of students. But this is an example that may give you some ideas if you're working with a student, and this it kind of connects with you. So this study, adapting instructional program to the needs of students with Down syndrome, used the Road to the Code program for students with Down syndrome. So they used an existing commercial program, and they made adaptations to the program to meet the needs of the students with Down syndrome that they were teaching. So the general adaptations, and again, here is a link to the I had a little trouble with this article. I tried to only use articles that I could find for free on the internet, like none that we had to go to the library to get. So I had a little trouble with this article. Sometimes the links was working and sometimes it wasn't. So this link here, it links to a page that just shows you the tables, but the tables is kind of where all the good stuff is. So that's okay. You don't get the whole article, but you get the tables, and the tables gives you a lot of information. I have replicated table 3 on this slide, and these are the general adaptations that they made to the commercially available program. So they did things like simplifying the script, increasing the use of explicit language, decreasing, you know, making sentences simpler, more direct, using less words, increasing direct instruction. So that kind of we do, I do, we do, you do. They focus on 3 target words and letters per lesson, so that working memory didn't have as much of an influence. You know, that is a concern or a need of students with more significant disabilities. So finding ways so that to kind of focus the instruction is important. Related to that, increasing the practice of mastered items. So always kind of circling back to things that were previously mastered so that they stay mastered, so that they maintain that skill. Integrating review of letter sounds, target words, phonological awareness across all activities. So again, that's circling back to maintain those skills. Decreasing unnecessary visual images and verbal language. So that goes to that simplified script. Monitoring behavior and engagement, use of PBIS strategies to really focus and help the students focus. This is, you know, this can be hard work for some students. So anything we can do to help with that engagement. Again, they focus on 3 letters at a time. New letters were introduced based on mastery. So they weren't introduced based on a schedule, like we do this for 3 days and then we introduce the next one. It was based on how the students mastered the skill to indicate that they were ready for the next set. And then they use the most to least system of prompting. So if you're familiar with prompting, there are a variety of different prompting systems. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. Most to least system of prompting is you provide the most prompts first, and then on a kind of predetermined schedule, you decrease the amount of prompting that you give. So you kind of like give everything up front. And then as the student is making progress, you decrease those prompts, and you do that systematically till you're down to no prompts. So that's the system of prompting that they used. Now, they also provided specific adaptations per activity. So like I said, if you go on the table only, you can see link here, you can see like for these different activities that were a part of the curriculum, these tables provide specific examples of how they modified those activities. So if you're familiar with this program, or if you're familiar with these kinds of activities, I thought that this was a good resource to have, because you can see how they modified it. Again, doesn't mean that this will work for all students, but it just gives you an example. So again, so that's an example of how an existing program was modified for students with Down syndrome. There's this other article focused on phonics skill instruction for students who were using an AAC device. So these were students who either didn't have verbal speech or didn't have reliable verbal speech and used an AAC device. So I thought, again, this is an example of how it could possibly be done. It may work for students that you work with, it may not. But this is an example. And what I've replicated here from the linked article is the skill, what the teacher did to demonstrate that skill, and then what the student with the AAC device would do to demonstrate the skill. So for example, phoneme identification, the teacher produced the targeted sound, and then the student pressed the letter button on the AAC device. So kind of like the AAC version of demonstrating that skill. This is a challenge because obviously a lot of this has to do with verbal speech, and how do you do that with a student who uses an AAC device? So again, this provides just an example of what this might look like for students who this type of instruction would be appropriate for them, and who also use an AAC device. So again, you can click on the link here to go to the actual article, but this table is kind of a good summary of what the skill is, how the teacher demonstrates it and asks for it from the student, and then how the student demonstrates it using their device. So the next section is on comprehension strategies.
And Kristin, I just want to add to that too. I did put into the chat, like, the other thing to think about, and I meant to mention this when we were talking about maybe some specific strategies for word recognition. But the other thing too is that if you have a student who's using AAC in any way, shape, or form, whether that's low tech or mid tech or high tech, they should go through a set process, that process by Joy Zabala, to determine what their AAC modes and any AT that they may need. So if you're in Pennsylvania, I would contact your IU if you have a student that needs to go through that set process, set standing for student, environment, task, and tools. And it's just a facilitated process, brainstorming process, but it would be tailored to each individual. This is the individual part of IEP, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry. I was trying to type that, and I was like, this is going to take me too long to type.
Oh, no.
So
and I just wanted to see, I just saw I just had a second to peek at the chat, and the question asks, is the link hot on the PDF that we were given? It should work. I tested it out. It worked for me. I hope it works for you. If it doesn't, let us know. Even if I noticed on the PDF, some of them didn't have like the underline under it, like, which tends to indicate a hyperlink, but click on it or hover over it and it should provide a link to you. And if it doesn't, we can figure that out and give it to you.
And we're seeing some questions about the slide with the chart not being on the PDF.
I did that. I apologize. I did that. The same information is there. I just did it in a way that made it accessible, because tables are not too accessible for a screen reader. So I just reoriented it, but the information is all there. It just looks different.
And I was going to say, I'm looking at it right now at the PDF, and it's slide 18 on the PDF.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It should all be the same, but I just did it for screen reader accessibility purposes.
That makes sense to me. Okay, so specific strategies for thinking about comprehension. So here what we need is to make sure that our students have a consistent and understandable graphic organizers that might help facilitate their understanding of content. So I was thinking about potentially like something that provided space for 3 facts and however they would respond to that, but 3 facts that they learned from what it was that they were just reading, or a simplified story grammar with characters, plot, first, next, then, and then like how it gets resolved, how the problem gets resolved. Anyway, maybe they're enlarged, maybe they're color coded. All of those things may be needed in graphic organizers for your students, depending on their needs. We might want to pre-teach vocabulary and concepts. We want to make sure that if our students are, if we're familiar with the terms core and fringe vocabulary with our students who need that for communication purposes, do they have access to the correct vocabulary to be able to talk about and engage in the content that we're asking them to do when we're asking them to comprehend? Are we providing that opportunity to engage in a back and forth about what it is that they're being or what they're reading or what's being studied? We can look for modified texts. So if you're not familiar yet with tarheelreader.org, you can check that out. There are some texts on there. I know that there are other places that text is available, or it's relatively easy to modify text yourself too. I mean, it takes time, but it's not a difficult process. Make sure that we're addressing all genres of literature, that we're not focused on either fiction or nonfiction, that we're providing access to a wide range. Make sure that the answers and the language, thanks Andrea, the answers and the language that they need to talk about the comprehension questions or respond to what it is that they've been reading is available. And as we were just talking about programming that AAC, or even if they use you know, a manual board or even an eye gaze frame, that you have everything that they need to be able to talk about what it is that they're reading.
So again, a couple examples or articles that can give you some information about what this, an example of what this might look like. Again, not the example. This article by Geist and Erickson looks at vocabulary strategies, again, for students who use AAC. And it gives you information both on word selection and on what vocabulary instruction should look like. So when thinking about words to select, definitely, you know, building interest in new words, connecting new to known words is a good strategy. Being deliberate in selecting those words, so focusing on tier 2 words, so those words that are more common and kind of overlap different academic areas. So words like perform, category, describe, so kind of words that you get a lot of bang for your buck for. You can use in a lot of different contexts. Words that again can connect to known words, and words that the student can use to describe their own experience or can use to develop a deeper knowledge of the content. You know, the same reason we would choose words to focus on for any of our students. What we have to think about too with AAC is using those existing vocabulary, using the existing vocabulary within the AAC to connect to those new words. I am by no means an expert in AAC, but I know, you know, there's only so much real estate, so to speak, with an AAC device. So you have to be kind of efficient in how you use it. And so making those connections will help with generalization. In terms of what the vocabulary instruction should look like, you want to provide examples, student-friendly definitions, and again, relate those high-frequency words or those known words to the new words. You want to have instructional activities that provide examples and non-examples, word relationships. You want to generate sentences, associate known words with the new words. So a lot of these activities hopefully sound familiar because they are familiar to what you would do with any student in general education. So like I said, this should provide you a link to this article that like I've just done the summary here, so it can provide more examples. And I think this article kind of shows a thread kind of through the article about what this instruction might look like. Another example from Mims and her colleagues is on comprehension instruction. And this was for students with intellectual disabilities and visual impairments. So, you know, we talked about at the beginning, who are the students in this group that we're talking about? And that is, you know, that could be students with multiple disabilities. So they might have intellectual disabilities and some sort of sensory impairment. So this was an example of a research study that addressed this group of students. Again, this might not apply to all your students, but it is an example to kind of take and learn from. So in this example, it was with elementary age students, and they used, they took books that were typically used in those grade levels and adapted them. So they shortened the book by removing some pages and some lines. They laminated the pages, and for the visual needs of the students, they identified 5 objects that were critical to the understanding of the book. And Velcroed them to the pages. So for example, for Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, they used gum, a candy bar, pillow, shoelaces, and a cereal box to kind of represent touch points or important parts of the story, and they related their comprehension questions to those objects. They did add some appropriate text so that those objects appeared twice, so there could be some repetition in there. And then they highlighted a repeated line. So obviously in the book we were talking about, Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, that was an easily repeated line throughout the story. So when reading the book, they paired the object with the relevant part of the story. They asked comprehension questions throughout the story rather than at the end. And they used least to most prompting for the WH question. So in another example, we talked about most to least prompting, where you provide more prompts up front and then systematically decrease the level of prompts. With least to most, it's the opposite. So you provide the question and then you wait a certain number of seconds and see if the student can answer on their own. If they don't answer, you provide the first level of prompt, which is the least level of prompt. If they don't answer, you provide a next increased level of prompt, and so forth until if the student still doesn't answer, you provide the prompt that will guarantee a response from the student. So this one, again, there are pros and cons of each prompting strategy, but that was the strategy chosen in this study. And again, this link should link to the article, and it talks about each of the adapted books that they used, and like the examples, and it has the comprehension questions that they used in the story too. So they used other stories besides Alexander and the Terrible Day. So you can see some of the other books that they used in that study. So how can we plan for instruction to increase access and increase independence as readers? So Andra is going to talk to us about a planning tool that we found in our preparation for this session that can help with that. And Andra, let me know when you want me to bring it up, and I can bring it up on the screen.
Sure. So it's always great to have a tool to help plan. You certainly can't do this all on your own. You need your colleagues around you with expertise to help brainstorm and plan. This literacy instruction and support planning tool was developed using the Browder and colleagues conceptual model that Kristin shared before in those earlier slides. And if you remember, the 2 primary literacy goals outlined in the model were increasing access to literature and then increasing students' independence as a reader. They also note that access to age-appropriate literature should remain a focus for students as they go through their grade levels and throughout their lifespan. So what is the tool? It is a framework that can be used by IEP team members, including parents, to guide planning and instruction. And in the document, we'll show you in a minute, but they do have some guidance that's offered to how to go through the article and then go through the tool as a team. They first offer that individual team members can review those 10 evidence-based, research-based tips, pause after each tip and take some notes for themselves, because each person on the team is going to bring their own experience with the student, their knowledge, their expertise to the team, and then meet with the team all together and use those 10 tips and the discussion points to guide discussion and planning for the student. So I'll have, Kristin, you can click on that little toolbox and it should come up, or you may already have it
Oh, okay.
ready. So that's,
Sure.
yeah, good. So this will be linked and you can have that. And if you go to the second page, you can see, if you scooch up just a little bit, Kristin, just on that second page, you can see that the tips start right here. So there are 10 of them all together. So again, that guidance to individually read through tip 1, jot some notes down, tip 2, jot some notes down. And on page 3 of this document, you can see on this first page of the tool, the tips are all listed on the left-hand side with some discussion points. So this is really nice to kind of check off, make some notes individually, and collect those as you come back with the team. The next page of the tool should look a little familiar. Here's section C, it's instructional emphasis. So looking at rating, the balance between functional reading and learning how to read for the student, and then student interests. And then these bottom 2 pieces, section E, increasing independence as a reader, again, rating where your priority level would be for planning instruction and opportunities to apply those skills for the student, and then increasing access to literature, again, priorities and opportunities for them to do that. The overarching goal being getting down as a team and providing, using that information to how to prioritize, goals to prioritize, thinking about the school year that is coming, to provide planning and goals for the upcoming year. If you scroll down in that document, it does at the very bottom, I believe, the whole document. Yes, sorry.
Okay. Yep. All right.
Whole article. You will begin to see as the tips kind of fly in, but at the bottom of it, it will share that planning tool and just following through the steps of how to go through that tool. So we wanted to share that because we thought it was aligned to the research that we're sharing, and that tool in that alignment and planning as an individual and a team together for the students is a really nice way to think about that.
And it's always so hard to, you're trying to think about the needs of the individual student, where they currently are, where the student and the family want to get in the future, what's going on in the classroom. So yeah, this may be a good, at least something to structure that discussion and the decision making. And yeah, so Andrew said that the toolbox is a link, and then also at the end of the presentation where we have the references, you can get a link to the article there too. So we figured that there might be some questions, and we wanted to take a stab at answering some of the questions kind of upfront before we get into your individual questions. So one question we get, maybe not exactly worded this way, but variations on this idea. So when should you stop teaching a student how to read? And that question of what should be the focus of academic instruction for students? We talked about functional reading, and sometimes with this population of students, again, sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes with this population of students, functional reading gets interpreted as sight word instruction. And so sight word instruction is the focus of instruction as opposed to decoding and word recognition, other, phonics-based word recognition strategies. And, that may be an appropriate thing for some students, but it may not be. So when should the focus shift? What are decisions that can be made, or what can help make those decisions? Again, we would say never, but of course, the caveat on that, or the clarification on that, is that we understand that we don't know every single student out there, and that programming and goals are the decision-making process that an IEP team undertakes, because they know the student the best. So we're just providing guidance and things to think about, but the IEP team decision, we understand and value and know that they are the ones who make the decisions. We know that priorities may change over the years, and they may be influenced by multiple factors. For example, students' secondary, post-secondary transition plans, that may focus and direct where a student is going and what instruction is needed to get to that student to that goal and to that place post-secondary world wise. So we understand that as well. That's another reason why we shared at the beginning of the presentation the model with the different triangles that represented more or less emphasis across the grades. In the early grades, how to read may be a greater focus, and over time those functional reading skills may become more of a focus in service of a transition plan. Again, the tool that Andrew just showed may provide a structure to help make some of those decisions. We also don't want we want everyone progress monitoring students' learning and students' progress towards a goal. But you also have to consider that those data within the context of the type of instruction that the student received. Was it reflective of best practices? If it wasn't reflective of best practices, maybe it wasn't the instruction that would best meet the needs of the student. And so we don't want to kind of eliminate a focus on becoming an independent reader if they didn't get the instruction that would meet their needs the best. So we also know through various research studies and just our common practice that progress happens, but it can sometimes happen at a slower rate for this group of students. So we don't want to kind of compare one student's progress to another. We have to recognize that we want to see progress. We just have to recognize that it may be a shallower slope than with other students. And we also want to encourage you to think that, again, some independent reading skills are better than no independent reading skills. And so, students, again, every student is different, but some students may not be on grade level with their fluent independent reading skills, but any independent reading skills that they get will benefit them in the long run. So again, this is a very individualized decision. We can't, nor do we want to tell you exactly what to do, because we don't know exactly what to do. But we hope that this provides you with some guidance about things to consider in making those decisions. Kristin and Andrea, anything to add to that?
The thing I usually think about is that it's really about that IEP team decision. And that's what you said right up front. So that IEP team, multidisciplinary team, coming together and saying, what's the best way to divvy up the time that we have with this kid. And I believe the same as you, that we need to make sure that we're continuing to teach to decode and encode, and doing what they need to do to become as independent as possible.
And and hopefully some of this information will help inform those decisions. So is reading instruction for this group of students structured the same way as it is in general education? How much time should be given? Kristin, do you want to talk about this? Because I think a lot of this information was from your experience.
Yeah, I just know, well, I was thinking too about when we're working with like a 90-minute literacy block in early grades in a gen ed classroom. We know that a 90-minute block of literacy instruction for the kids that we're really talking about during this session today is probably not going to actually mesh with what with their attention and how they're able to attend for that length of time. So I think we actually have a question in the chat from Michelle regarding this, and I'm just going to click that we're kind of answering this live. She's also talking about in an inclusion situation. So what I have recommended to people and teams that I've worked with too is this idea that maybe we should think about literacy kind of in 3 buckets. So there's a bucket that has to do with language. There's a bucket that has to do with word recognition, and then there's a bucket that has to do with comprehension. And can we maybe chunk up their instruction into certain aspects here, or those 3 buckets, and kind of plan for that over the course of the day for students? I think what you have here on the slide as well, Kristin, this idea like what can be done in general education it really should be done in general education. And they should have access to the general education curriculum and those curricular resources, because without access to that, how does a student ever learn stuff that they're not getting access to? Not to mention all of the benefits that are well documented for decades about inclusion, not just for students with IEPs, but for all students. And thinking what we can do in smaller groups, maybe what needs to be done individually, and maybe what can be done with whole group. And as you're saying here, repetition, lots of repetition, and thinking about what those goals are. As a student progresses through the grade levels and they hit transition age, we maybe need to shift a little bit of kind of how our time is spent, and think with our IEP team, our multidisciplinary team, what we need to do to support those goals as well.
And I will recognize that the research that we provided you, it was research. So it wasn't always in the most natural of settings. It was more individualized to the specific needs of the student. So these things, we can provide guidance of things for you to think about in terms of that. How do you kind of align with general education and the core curriculum versus the individual skills that the student individually needs? That is the challenge of how to distribute the time and the teacher availability that you have based on IEP goals, based on what the IEP team decides, based on what the gen ed curriculum is, and based on what the individual student skill needs are. But that's a huge difference, is that the gen ed curriculum may not provide the kind of repetition, or like the pacing guide may not provide the kind of repetition that a student in this group may need. So that's probably going to be something you have to think about and plan for in order to see progress. Where do we go to find good materials? Where are some good places to start? So definitely, if you're on this, like if you're a special education teacher, reach out to your gen ed colleagues to get access to things that they have. look to the Pennsylvania core standards, reach out to PaTTAN and your IU colleagues who are working on this. They definitely have a lot of resources to share and would be more than willing to brainstorm and think through things. We have a variety of websites here that are good resources for you guys to use. The first couple are, are focused on literacy and the science of reading and giving you access to instructional resources on that. Kristin mentioned Tar Heel Reader for adapted books, Bookshare, similar to that. The National Center on Intensive Intervention isn't specific, definitely would include literacy. It's not specific to that. It's focused on providing that level of instruction to students with more intensive, more significant disabilities, and how do you kind of scale up that instruction to identify and address those individual needs. This Penn State website focuses on literacy instruction for students with more significant disabilities. It provides examples of materials, different kinds of activities. I believe, Kirsten, I think you mentioned that or at least in the past, it included videos too of what instruction would look like. So that's a good resource to go to, and it's in our own backyard. So that's nice too. And then this last one, it may be a little bit of a stretch to include this, but it's a good website. It's the Center on Secondary Education for Students with Autism Spectrum Disorder. So the resources on there were developed with students on the spectrum in mind, and focusing on secondary age students, which we know we need a lot more for that age group of students across the board, general or special ed. It doesn't provide information as much on the independent reader side, but it does provide information on comprehension strategies. So it's a good website to look into if you work with secondary students on the autism spectrum, and it provides some support in terms of comprehension strategies. So these, if they're not familiar, definitely check out these resources, and they're good places to start. So how do I align to what students are doing with their therapy, speech, OT, PT, with what I am doing with instruction? So collaboration. We know that's important. We know you probably want to do it, and finding time to do it is also a challenge. But we need to plan for that generalization for this group of students, more so than any other group of students. So the things that those students are learning in the special ed classroom or in their support time with speech, OT, PT, we need to have that collaboration so that they can practice those skills in other settings, and those skills, the strength of those skills can build as a result of that practice. Definitely look at your look at your system to support that common planning time. I provided a link to the High Leverage Practices website. They have information and resources and support ideas for how to help that collaboration. It's a good website too in general for other areas, so you could definitely explore beyond collaboration, but that's one place you can go for a little bit more information. In terms of assessments, you should use reading assessments. Generally aren't normed for this group of students, didn't have this group of students in the norming population, but they can still be used. If you look at a lot of the research studies that we cited, are oral reading fluency measures, sound naming fluency tests are used. So you can still use them with caution and understanding that depending on how broad the measure is, progress might be slow, but you could still see progress. You can also, even though they are standardized measures, if you're using them for progress monitoring and for formative assessment to inform your instruction, if you take the timing element out of it, give them more than a minute, you can probably gain more information from it. Again, you can't use it to compare to other people because the standardization is gone, but it can still help you inform your instruction and may be a useful tool. And again, you want to choose assessments that are aligning to your instruction. So, there's a match between what you're assessing and what you're teaching. Okay, so like I said, these are all the references, the research articles that we cited. This first one was not cited on a slide, but it shows it gives examples of how to increase the intensity of reading instruction. So that's a good article we didn't use it within the slides, but kind of like those tables that talked about the study with students with Down syndrome, it shows examples of how they intensified reading instruction. So if that's an area of interest, I just wanted to highlight that article.